Over the last 40 years, the Silicon Valley Leadership Group has led the way on infrastructure for our companies and communities, driving better transit, less traffic, and more housing at all levels. SVLG led and co-led ballot initiatives that have brought over $30 billion in funding for Bay Area transportation projects. From bringing BART to Silicon Valley to Measure RR saving Caltrain in 2020. Transit victories like these develop a ring of rail around the Bay. So, as our region grows, traffic doesn't have to. But it's not just about getting to our region, it's about living and thriving here. SVLG co-founded the Housing Trust Silicon Valley. It's provided over 20,000 housing opportunities since 2000. We've led measures providing $6 billion in funding for housing veterans and low-income individuals. We've supported legislation to make it easier to build homes and backyard ADUs. And now we're sponsoring AB 2234 to accelerate permits so housing can be built faster and more affordably. Our world-leading innovation economy needs an innovative infrastructure, a focus on the critical solutions that support our common future. And you'll find those conversations here today at this forum, Silicon Valley Leadership Group's Building Forward.
Good morning. I'm Ahmad Thomas, CEO of the Silicon Valley Leadership Group. Thank you for joining us today for SVLG's Building Forward Infrastructure Forum. Our infrastructure team, led by Jason Baker, Vince Rocha, and Marley Smith, has put together a dynamic, solutions-focused program, bringing together the local, state, and national leaders who are tackling the infrastructure issues that impact the region today. We also look to the future of infrastructure investments that will strengthen business competitiveness, enhance equity in our communities, and improve quality of life for the next chapter of Silicon Valley's innovation economy. At SVLG, we're working with the leading companies in our region to shape a new vision of Silicon Valley corporate citizenship and a brand of leadership that prioritizes an entrepreneurial approach to policy and our public and private investments. To that end, today you'll hear from respected leaders who are deeply focused on driving solutions, like Deputy Secretary of the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development, Adrianne Todman, who will give us the federal perspective on key housing initiatives. We're so pleased to be hosting Katie Thomson next. She's the Deputy Director of the U.S. Department of Transportation, who has also been named as the Director of Bipartisan Infrastructure Law Implementation. She'll share the goals and progress on that $1.2 trillion effort, truly a once-in-a-generation opportunity to shape our region's infrastructure investments. California Transportation Secretary Toks Omishakin will be covering with San Jose Mayor Sam Liccardo the state's efforts to assist and revitalize transportation and transit as we emerge from the pandemic. We've got a deep dive into missing middle housing with Meta and regional media partners. We'll talk high-speed rail with former U.S. Transportation Secretary Ray LaHood and a great panel of experts from the authority and AECOM. And we're so fortunate to have Governor Gavin Newsom providing our program close. We have a lot to cover today in a program that I think will be very dynamic and very fruitful. To kick us off, we have some opening remarks from Senator Toni Atkins. She serves as President Pro Tem of the California Senate. Senator Atkins, welcome.
Hello, I'm Senate President Pro Tempore Toni Atkins. I'm glad to join you to help kick off this year's virtual Building Forward Infrastructure Forum. This week is all about building connections, which is perfect because that's what infrastructure really is, connecting people in meaningful ways. Connecting people to the internet, to their jobs and loved ones by bike, road, and train. Building and improving infrastructure that will move California forward is something we are constantly working on in Sacramento. It's obvious that just about everything relies on a good internet connection and access to computers. School, work, telehealth. Just look at this forum. Our state is home to the top tech companies in the world, many of which are based in Silicon Valley. And yet so many families and businesses in rural and lower income areas throughout California still struggle to keep up digitally. This became glaringly apparent during the pandemic. That's why the state legislature invested $6 billion in 2021-22 budget to improve broadband infrastructure and internet access in unserved and underserved communities to help families, students, and teachers stay connected. For the workers who can't work from home and who are commuting around the state, we need to keep freeways in good condition and ensure that public transit is reliable. Investments in roads and transit not only connect people to where they need to go, whether that's to work, to school, or to visit family, they also create hundreds of thousands of high-wage jobs. Last year, I led the Sea Level Rise Mitigation and Adaptation Act to ensure that local coastal communities have the tools that they need to better prepare for and prevent the impact of sea level rise that will have on our roads, our bridges, and our ports. Climate change is here. If we ignore that reality and how it will impact our communities, we'll be underwater before we know it. Part of improving our infrastructure is also getting more people out of the super commute lifestyle. Too many workers who are central to our communities, our teachers, firefighters, and nurses, are priced out of housing near their jobs. It's bad for traffic, bad for families, bad for our air, and bad for our climate. We need more housing near jobs, and it needs to be housing that essential workers can afford. Last year, the legislature, led by Senate Democrats, made historic investments in housing and passed critical legislation to spur production, including my bill, SB 9, the California Home Act. This year, we're continuing that progress, and we remain laser-focused on ensuring that affordability is a key component of those discussions. Part of that is ensuring families who are still struggling to pay rent and mortgages as a result of COVID-19 and have applied for relief are able to get the assistance that they need. Another component is widening access to home ownership, especially for people who will be the first in their family to buy a home, like through the California Dream for All first-time homebuyer program. Under this innovative program, the state would partner with first-time homebuyers to provide 20% or more towards their home purchase. For example, in the case of a $400,000 home, the buyers would save $80,000 from the get-go. In return, the home buyer and the state would share the equity appreciation proportionately. The program would eliminate the need for a major down payment or perhaps any down payment at all, as well as take away the need for expensive mortgage insurance payments. That translates to lower monthly mortgage costs. We're currently working out the details with the Treasurer's Office and California Forward. Owning a home lays the foundation for creating generational wealth and strengthening the middle class. And we believe the new approach the California Dream for All program takes would make that a reality for more families. It's innovative thinking and bold approaches that have guided our state through the most challenging of times. And it's those kind of actions that will enable our continued success. California corners the market on the world's most innovative companies, from Silicon Valley's tech companies to the biotech and life science businesses in my own district, to the premier media and entertainment industry in Los Angeles. We strive to be just as innovative at the state level when it comes to the infrastructure that will continue to move California forward. At the end of the day, investing in infrastructure is really investing in Californians, and every Californian is worth it. Thank you.
Still to come at Building Forward, high-speed rail, a panel on the missing middle in housing, and an infrastructure talk from Governor Gavin Newsom. But first, we thank our sponsor, Meta, for their support of our forum and for driving more affordable housing across the Bay Area for everyone. Next, we have the Great Rehabilitation, getting more homes in more places across the nation with Deputy Secretary of the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development, Adrianne Todman. Talking with her is Katie Farrick, Senior Director of Workplace Programs, LinkedIn.
Welcome, Deputy Secretary Todman. Very excited that you're here today. Let us.
It's my pleasure to be here.
Yeah, thank you. Can you tell us something about your guiding vision as you approach your role in HUD and throughout your career in housing?
No, thank you for that great question. One of the things that I believe in is that every voice matters. And so the approach I've taken to this position, and really I've taken throughout my career inside of the housing space, is making sure that everybody who is part of the system that has a voice, that has a need, is able to lean in and give commentary and provide, feedback on things we need to do better. And I look at that even internally inside of the HUD family. We have many different offices, all of whom have wonderful missions and do the things that they do, but sometimes they can speak across each other or over and under each other. And one of the things that I've made clear is if we are talking about anything that's impacting the communities in America, we need to make sure that we are aligned internally and we are speaking with one HUD voice. And so that's something that I see as a way to look at our work. I think it helps break down walls inside of our organization, but it also helps the people who rely on us to do our job well understand what we're saying when we're speaking with one voice. And so it's, we're not perfect yet. It continues to be a challenge, but it is something that I feel that will help folks across the country as they're dealing with our multitude of programs.
Thank you for that. As you may know, some estimates show California has a 3.5 million unit housing deficit. The trend is longstanding. The state's population has increased 3.2 times more with more people than housing units over the last 10 years. And now we have 2.93 Californians for every occupied unit of housing, which is far above our national average of 2.53. How does the Biden administration see its approach to helping states and local government create more housing at all income levels?
Those are staggering numbers. And sadly, California is not unique in terms of what is experiencing right now in terms of housing supply and also just housing affordability. And one of the reasons that I was so excited to join this administration is that this president and this vice president and Secretary of HUD understand those challenges in California and across the country. And we saw from day one last year that there was a lot of robust conversation about how do we help families during the pandemic to stay in their homes and to be well. And we made sure that there was rent relief. We made sure that there was relief for folks who are struggling with their mortgages. And so from day one, we saw that there was an intentionality in terms of how to help families with their housing. And it's now progressed to how do we look forward? How do we build? And one of the things I'm very proud of is that in the president's 2023 budget, there is a big deal number in there when it comes to affordable housing, a $35 billion big deal. And I've been in the housing space for a very long time, and I've not seen a proposal like this throughout my career where we're saying to folks, look, if we're going to take this on, we have to resource the issue. And so that $35 billion will be provided to states and localities to help them with the very thing that you're talking about. How do we create gap financing to build some of the units that we need to build? And in addition to that, we're going to be encouraging states and localities to build in a smart way. What are the barriers that are out there as it relates to building housing and making that housing affordable? What creative things can you do? And we are going to resource those creative ideas when we receive them. And so this, of course, is a budget proposal. And so we're very hopeful that our friends on the Hill will take us up on our offer.
Great. So, Secretary, is HUD seeing best practices or good examples of how states and local jurisdictions are tackling the issue of our country's need for affordable housing?
We absolutely are, Katie. You know, one of the things that we recognize is that most of these solutions are happening on the ground, and HUD's role and the federal government's role is to resource it, encourage it, provide the best guidance and best practices as we can. So there's a whole community of practice that we've created inside of the umbrella of an initiative that we call House America. And through House America, we're asking all of our partners who sign up, and California is a partner, all of our partners who sign up to share with us what are the creative things that you're doing to help all families, but particularly our homeless neighbors. And I'll start with California. I mean, the state has taken on something that is innovative and is quietly making its way across the country in terms of repurposing hotels and motels to provide housing. For individuals. You know, it seems like a common sense idea, but people have to actually do it. And California is making that work. And as I've spoken to other cities and states, I always lift up that one idea that California has really embraced and is using federal fundings to carry out. I look to our partners down in San Antonio, and they're doing a fantastic job creating a new local bond, and they're utilizing some of our American Rescue Plan funds to do that. One of the roles that HUD plays, the space that we fill, is making sure that states like California, that cities like San Antonio, places in Austin and Baltimore, even here in Washington, D.C., that we're all learning from each other. We recognize that this work happens outside of our four walls, so we want to make sure we're bringing resources and we're bringing an opportunity for great ideas to occur.
Great, thank you for that. So just to kind of dig in on that a little more, I love that, and I love House America. I'm certainly going to track that. In Silicon Valley, the communities here have passed tax measures. We had Measure A in Santa Clara County, Measure E in San Jose, and that has allowed us to invest hundreds of millions of local tax dollars into affordable housing. And we leverage this to with up to around $100 million from the private sector through Housing Trust's Tech Fund. How does HUD plan to continue supporting local initiatives to ensure communities have reliable resources to invest in affordable housing?
Right. So again, in addition to the funds we've received in our 22 budget, in addition to our proposal for 23 for the $35 billion housing supply fund, we are not waiting for those funds to be deployed before we provide information and resources in terms of things we can do right now. And so last September, one of the things that the administration did was we looked across all of the agencies and said, what can we do? What can we do in real time as we're working with our partners on the Hill? What can we do to really get more resources with the tools that we have? And so we've done a couple of things. We have locked arms again with our friends at Treasury for a program that's called a Federal Financing Bank Risk Share. And that through that program, we'll be working with state HFAs in deploying probably about 24,000 additional units over the next couple of years across the country. And we're very excited to be able to do that. In addition, HUD looked at, well, there's some HUD assets that we have, unfortunately, through foreclosures and other things that occur when people lose their homes. HUD does find itself with real estate owned homes. And we have decided we want to make sure that those homes are going to owner occupants. We want to make sure they're going to nonprofits and mission-minded local governments to get those homes back onto the tax rolls, but more importantly, to make sure that we're continuing to have a supply of homes for home ownership across the country. We know that is a big gap there. In addition to that, we are also making sure that we are taking a hard look at our existing programs. HUD has begun a new housing supply initiative inside of our program areas. Some of the watchers and listeners today probably deploy our home program, probably work clearly with Treasury Department with the tax credit. We know that there are pain points that occur when these programs are coming together. And so we are looking at ways to be smart on how how we can eliminate some of the complexities of how our programs are carried out. And we're also looking at ways that HUD's programs and Treasury, who I keep saying Treasury because they play a big role in creating housing across the country. And we're talking with them early and often about ways that we can make sure our programs are working together better locally. And so the Deputy Secretary of Treasury and I have locked arms, and we will continue to do that heavy lift.
Great, thank you. That's super informative. So let's talk about vouchers. We have a great need for housing vouchers. These are key to financing local affordable housing developments, since they ensure that people will be able to use them to pay rents, particularly in new affordable developments. How is HUD working to increase the supply of vouchers, particularly in areas creating new affordable housing units?
Right. No, vouchers play a critical role. I mean, we can't build ourselves necessarily out of the housing affordability and supply issues that we have. We need to take a look at how do we use our existing housing units and make them more affordable. And that's what vouchers do. They help to supplement the rent of low and moderate income people across the country. We were very pleased that we were received about 25,000 new vouchers in our 2022 budget. We have proposed another 200,000 vouchers. We know the need is there. We know that everybody in California knows the need is there. And so we are going to push hard to make sure we get more vouchers in hand. And here's what we need, though, when we receive those vouchers. And I, I'm saying this because I'm hoping that it'll reach somebody's kind ear who's a landlord. We need landlords. The voucher program only works well when there are landlords who are able and willing to work with their local communities to house veterans, seniors, families with children, our homeless neighbors. We need landlords to work in partnership with us to deploy these funds. Otherwise, the program doesn't work. And so, to all the landlords who might be watching and listening to this, certainly please continue to be a partner, or please consider being a partner with your local agencies in carrying out the voucher program. The one thing about the voucher program that we feel is very unique and continues to grow is it provides an opportunities for families to make a choice in terms of where they live. And those choices can be guided by better schools. That choice could be guided by living closer to where they work if there are some transportation issues. That choice could be guided by making sure that they're around their support system. So the voucher program is a very powerful tool. And that's why we want more vouchers to help more families.
Thank you, Deputy Secretary. One last question. Is there, what would be the call to action? Is there something we could be doing here in Silicon Valley to support our housing unit, creation in the country?
Sure. I think you're doing some of it right now, which is always to bring awareness to a problem that you want to solve. Look, for a very long time, housing, quality, affordable housing was taken for granted. No one really talked about it. We talked about our roads and our schools. And I think because of that lack of intentionality, we have years of productivity that we've lost, and we probably would not be in as dire straits as we are now. So I think that we need to be very aware that every voice, every pen, every production like this, we need to make sure that people are lifting up the concern and sharing that concern with your elected leaders, sharing that concern with each other. If we are not making it clear that this is something that we want to solve as taxpayers or just people who live in this country, then it won't be solved. And it's going to take all of us to get it right.
Great. Thank you, Deputy Secretary Todman. This has been incredibly informative. Really, really appreciate your time. It's wonderful to see how the local meets the federal in solving our housing needs in the country. So I really appreciate your participation here today with us.
And thank you, Katie. Thank you for the work that you're doing and for taking time to chat with me today.
Hi, I'm Vince Rocha, Vice President of Housing and Community Development here at the Silicon Valley Leadership Group. And today we're here in Millbrae at a wonderful mixed-use construction site next to the BART station. It's no secret that for decades, Silicon Valley has led the growth of the American economy. Driving that growth is our amazing and talented workforce. Those people need a place to work, live, and thrive. But right now, California has a 3.5 million unit housing shortage. That lack of affordable and market rate housing is one of the most critical challenges to California's business competitiveness, which is why SVLG is co-sponsoring AB 2234. It's a major new housing bill that we are co-sponsoring with the Housing Action Coalition that is authored by Assembly members Robert Rivas and Tim Grayson. This bill modernizes our residential building process and reduces delays. To get a real-world development perspective, you have to talk to someone building right now. And for that, we've come to a construction site to talk to Republic Urban Properties President Michael Van Avery.
This would be the kitchen. You're standing in the kitchen right here. Okay. So this is the kitchen. This is your, what I would say your family living area.
My name is Michael Van Avery. I'm the president and CEO of Republic Urban Properties out of San Jose, California. My first development was in 1996, and it was the Stoll Orchard working for Citation Homes, where I had the pleasure of developing 90 single-family homes and restoring an old barn, which was part of the project. Millbrae Gateway Station has 400 total units, of which 320 are market rate and 20% are affordable for very low and low income veterans here in San Mateo County. The Gateway project also has 164 unit key Marriott Residence Inn, along with a 150,000 square foot office with 44,000 square feet of mixed use retail, one of the largest projects here in the Bay Area. It's right here at the BART station in Millbrae, California, with adjacency to San Francisco International and 16 miles south of downtown San Francisco.
Michael, tell me, what are the challenges here in Silicon Valley when it comes to residential permitting?
Well, the challenges for residential permitting are obviously timelines. From start to finish, if you're planning less than 3 years, you're kidding yourself. It takes a while because California is complex. We are seeing a little bit more online use now because of COVID, so I think the unintended consequences of permit online has helped, but we are still seeing struggles for government to keep up.
So moving with that online permitting, how's that helping or hurting affordable housing? How are we getting more of that production online?
I think it's really useful, especially in the beginning and the final stages where you can submit, construction drawings. I think the front end of the business, though, for zoning and general plan changes, still a little bit of a struggle, and government's still trying to work with it. But clearly, we were trending in that direction pre-COVID, and now I think it's the way we do business post-COVID going forward.
In terms of being able to plan and build and deliver affordable housing, how much do timelines really matter, having certainty in your business as you try to deliver this product?
When you're linked to off-site affordability, as the case here, making sure you hit the tax credit rounds on time and that you have all your permits in place along as much possible gap equity financing as possible is critical. So I'd say the timelines for affordable housing, you better meet your mark, because if not, the state's not going to give you the money.
So you're telling me the funding really is tied to your ability to deliver on time?
Absolutely, and that means that local government, the developer, the state, and everybody needs to be on the same page, and that's not easy, but it's possible. A more efficient permitting process would allow for plan checks to happen sooner on the back end of the permitting process. In addition, having inspections done a lot faster, which will translate into a faster building cycle and ultimately occupancy for that development. At best, permitting that's expedited on the back end of the process could save anywhere from 6 months to a year. That's valuable time. And that will get more affordable housing into the marketplace, which really is what we're all trying to accomplish here in California.
AB 2234 is all about modernizing the process to build housing right here in Silicon Valley. Cities will be required to publish a checklist for all applications, ensuring processing can be done online and within certain timeframes. Completed permit applications will have reliable and faster timelines between 30 and 60 days. This allows developers to get together their affordable housing finance, materials, and workers so that housing can get built at the speed and need of our housing crisis. To learn more about AB 2234 and how it's going to deliver more housing for Californians, go to svlg.org/housing.
Still to come at Building Forward, Secretary of the California Transportation Agency, Toks Omishakin, in conversation with San Jose Mayor Sam Liccardo. But first, we thank our production sponsor, Zoom, for their support of our forum, as well as for their fantastic partnership over this last year with Silicon Valley Leadership Group in creating dynamic, engaging events. Next, we have Executing the Big Blueprint, what the bipartisan infrastructure law has bought and built, and what's next. Our guest, Katie Thomson, Director of the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law Implementation from the U.S. Department of Transportation. Driving this conversation is SVLG's own Jason Baker, Senior Vice President, Infrastructure and Regional Partnerships.
Good morning, Katie. Thanks so much for joining us. You have such a cool job, the Director of Bipartisan Infrastructure Law Implementation, a historic time, an interesting job to do a lot of good work. Thanks to the law that you get to help implement, the administration just this month announced a historic investment of over $20 billion in American transit as part of the $1.2 trillion package. It's a lot of numbers. Could you give us a sense of what kind of change that kind of investment and the infrastructure law will bring to the U.S. transit systems, and in particular, what it means for large metro areas like Silicon Valley?
I do have one of the best jobs imaginable. I am a transportation geek, and for somebody like me, this is an opportunity of a lifetime. So the new law gives us funding for over 5 years, $660 billion across the Department of Transportation. And for transit alone, we have about $91 billion over 5 years, which is the largest investment we have had in the history of the program. Super exciting. We can continue to build on the successes that we've already had, but also touch more people, expand more systems, provide new services to large communities, to small communities, particularly with an emphasis on serving a more underserved communities. So just to give you a couple of examples, the funding will allow us to replace 500 aging subway, light rail, and commuter rail cars, and swap out 10,000 fossil fuel powered buses for clean electric vehicles or lower emitting emission vehicles. Again, as I said, we'll be able to bring transportation to new communities, both large and small. We have $23 billion set aside for our capital investment programs, including New Starts, which again means connecting more people with transit, which means giving better transportation services and more options to people across the country, investing in resilient systems, and reducing our climate footprint. So really, really exciting time across transportation, but particularly for transit, we believe this is transformative.
That's terrific, and you're with your people here, transit nerds. That's a big part of our audience here, and we're glad you're at the top transit nerd over there. You know, when you spend this kind of money in investments, especially government investments in general, and especially I think sometimes in transit, diversity, equity, inclusion is very important. And can you talk a little bit about how you and the administration see equity and diversity fitting into the bipartisan infrastructure law?
Yeah, equity is a cornerstone of every element of the bipartisan infrastructure law. And one of the things I think you will see historically about the transportation department is we have approached transportation in a siloed sort of way. So you have aviation, you've got transit, you have federal highways, you have federal rail. But we're trying to look more holistically at a connected system that, as I said earlier, gives people more options to travel the way they need to travel to meet their needs, whether it's education, jobs, healthcare. Equity is a priority, but one, because the president, it is one of his top policy objectives in his administration. But secondly, and more importantly, it's just the right thing to do. So equity, you will see equity. Certain programs are focused exclusively on equity and access, like FTA's program for more accessible stations. But you will also see equity as an element of everything we do across the department. So another good example is our discretionary programs that we've issued notices of funding opportunities to date. Each of those notices of funding opportunity has language in there around equity for underserved communities. If we have the legal authority to be more explicit about requirements in the application process, we will do that. If we have more generalized authority or are trying to encourage people to move in the right direction, we will do that. And it will be a consideration of all of our discretionary project awards. Of course, labor is an important piece of that. So building the technical capacity, building the number, bringing in new members to the workforce, giving them the training that they need for a whole array of jobs, whether it's rail or transit. That's another important part of equity. And you will see across our programs an enhanced focus on labor standards, labor opportunities, and training for labor workers, including specific programs to help train maintenance workers at transit facilities who can actually help maintain these low emission or no emission vehicles. And lastly, I just want to point out that we recently issued our equity action plan, and that supports the president's broader equity agenda. And it focuses on 4 key areas to advance investment and engagement. And those are wealth creation, power of community, interventions, and expanding access. So again, it's core to everything that we do. If you see greater opportunities for us to do more, do it differently, provide technical assistance to state and local authorities who need help in understanding what it means and how to deliver on equity, we'd love to be part of that conversation.
That's terrific, and I really get the point. DEI in transit is both about where infrastructure is built and how it's built, but also who builds it. It's not just getting people to jobs, but it is jobs in a lot of ways, and we can be mindful of who's in the pipeline to get those good paying jobs that can help sustain families. We at the Silicon Valley Leadership Group have a long history of working on local and regional measures to fund transit, because that's part of the way we try to partner with the state and local government, federal governments, to try to make sure we meet our transit needs. In 2020, we were working on a measure to raise about $100 billion over nine counties. And when we started, that seemed like a lot of money, like $100 billion. And it was a lot of money. But as we got through it and we talked to the transit operators throughout the 9-county Bay Area, we realized that the need was more than double that, at least, and probably even more again. I imagine that $1.2 trillion is also a lot of money, but it's a big country. Are there, I can't imagine it funds everything. Are there other things that you wished you could fund more of? There'd be more. If you had another $1 trillion, what kinds of things would you think would help even more?
Gosh, always happy to take more money, but I think I'm just thankful for the $660 billion that we do have now. And rather than focusing on the things I'd like to have, the department's focusing on what we can deliver with that $660 billion. And my hope is, well, let me first say, we all know that we have underinvested in infrastructure in this country for decades, and it will take us a long time to catch up. As I said at the outset, I'm absolutely thrilled that Congress gave us the money that it did, because it's a good down payment and will move us in the right direction. And so I'm really focused on ensuring that the department, in partnership with states and local governments and other stakeholders, is delivering on the promises of this law. So we can show actual results that are improving the lives of real people, whether they live in big communities, small communities, dense urban areas, the most remote parts of this country. And to me, that's the best path to persuading Congress that they need to continue to invest, if not at the $660 billion level over 5 years, at a substantial level, so we can continue to maintain what we have and also grow and adapt to meet the needs of the future. So, there are lots of things that I wish for, but I'm going to take this and I'm going to run with it and work with all of you to maximize the benefits and deliver results, which is our focus here at DOT.
That's great. And I think you and the administration have done a great job of getting out in the country and explaining to people this isn't just numbers or line items on a budget. This is real stuff in real communities that can make people's lives better. I think you're right. That's the way to help make this story and continue this kind of investment in America.
Yeah, and Jason, one thing I would say too for your group today is we are constantly, because we have learned, and you probably already know this, that stories about the impact on real people are what resonate and give people the encouragement and the ideas to build on that and be creative in how they solve problems. So if you have stories that you can, share of the impacts on real people, we would love to know what those are and be able to amplify those nationally to, share best practices and encourage other communities to think creatively about how to solve their transportation challenges.
Yeah, we will certainly do that. We gather those stories as we're working on legislation in Sacramento and otherwise to talk about the impacts on actual people in real life and what transit means. And I think maybe one of the ones that the many stories that hit home for me most was seeing how many people really relied on transit even during the middle of COVID, when if you could not ride transit, you probably wouldn't have. But so many people really rely on that for their day-to-day, and they're all essential workers and they were hopping on transit. I think that makes it really sort of hit home how much transit matters to real people. Moving to the next question here, some of the most successful rail lines in Silicon Valley, BART, Caltrain, that have been traditionally relying on fare box recovery, have been hit especially hard by the loss of ridership during the pandemic. I think it's no exaggeration to say that they likely wouldn't be running today if there weren't a lifeline for the federal government. The federal government offered to help get them through this. So thank you, and thank you to the administration. It was incredible and timely help that helped save whole rail lines and kept transit running for those who were relying on them during the pandemic. But that money is running out. What else can be done at the federal level to help cope with whatever the new normal for transit operations funding will be?
I think several things. The first is to ensure a continued source of funding to transit agencies across this country. The second thing is to help transit agencies prepare for and adapt to the new normal, which is working with all of you to gather, better data about how transit riders are using the system. So the patterns have changed, but the need hasn't necessarily changed. And what we are trying to do is to better understand, what ridership looks like. For example, you don't see as many people commuting to downtown areas, but you still see some traffic, suburb to suburb, or suburb to outer areas. And those are important services. And then, as you mentioned, essential workers are continuing to take transit. So it's about ensuring that the options are there, the services are reliable, and you have the capacity to meet your needs. It is true that, ridership, it's obviously true that ridership has dropped dramatically as a result of the pandemic. And we may not see rebounds to 100% of what we had before, but based on the data we're seeing, we're hoping for 70 to 80%. And if revenue box is not going to cover it, which I suspect it won't, then we're all going to have to think very creatively about how we preserve and enhance these vital transportation services. And we are doing research. We are engaging with transit agencies, our state partners, to better understand, predict, and manage the needs going forward. But transit is not only important to move people around, it is critical to underserved populations like minorities, people with disabilities, lower income groups who rely predominantly on transit. It is also a great way to reduce our carbon footprint in the transportation sector. So it is important, it is here to stay, and we need to think collaboratively about how to make it economically sustainable.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. You know, here in Silicon Valley, our members, businesses have been investing in transit and transit-oriented development in a big way. And I don't see that stopping anytime soon. The city of San Jose and Google just completed the San Jose Downtown West mixed use plan that'll put about 4,000 homes, including about a quarter of that affordable, right next to Diridon Station, 7.3 million square feet of office space, a lot of open space, right around what we think will be the Grand Central Station of the West. So, and our member Adobe is building big in downtown too, right near those, BART and Caltrain and high-speed rail, and where it really will be the center of transit in the area. How can business and government work together to keep investments in transit-oriented development and walkable, bikeable urban areas coming well into the future?
Well, I should start by saying I have been and continue to be a heavy user of transit, and I spent 4 years in Seattle before coming back to the Department of Transportation, where while I was in Seattle, transit was my sole source of moving around. So buses, bikes, sharing, all those kinds of things. Transit-oriented development continues to be a focus of the department. And I want to highlight 3 programs in particular. FTA's Transit-Oriented Development Planning Grant Program, its Joint Development Program, and then of course we have eligibility for funding transportation-oriented development projects through 2 of our DOT loan programs. We've also done Federal Highways and FTA together have published a couple of case studies focused on place-based measures and best practices for leveraging partnerships to invest in TOD and urban and suburban transit centers that are both walkable and bikeable. For those of you who may not be familiar with the TOD program, that provides grants for comprehensive or site planning in transit project corridors. To date, it's funded 110 planning studies totaling $90 million over the last 6 rounds. The second program I mentioned was FTA's Joint Development Program, which allows transit agencies to use FTA financial assistance or FTA assisted property to pursue development projects that are mutually beneficial for public transportation and local economies, including commercial, residential, and community focused developments. And then finally, as I mentioned, we have 2 financing programs here at DOT, which provide low interest, long-term grant or funding sources. One is TIFIA, one is RIFT, and they can be used also to fund transportation-oriented development projects. So we have an array of projects, also through some of our competitive discretionary grant programs. Some of those may be eligible for funding as well.
So that's really terrific to hear. Thank you so much, Catherine Thomson, for the work you do with the government and for joining us here today at the Silicon Valley Leadership Group.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Jason Baker, Senior Vice President of Infrastructure and Regional Partnerships at the Silicon Valley Leadership Group. Today we're starting a new series, Transportation Conversation, Dialogues in Transit. And we are here at Diridon Station to talk about transportation today and tomorrow with the perfect guest, Rod Diridon Sr. And talking with him is SVLG's new Director of Infrastructure, Marley Smith. Take a listen.
Hi Rod, I'm so excited we're here today.
Nice to be here.
So we're outside your station today, Diridon Station. How does it feel?
Oh, it's wonderful to have this historic landmark still here.
Yeah. So you're a big fan of electrification. What should we electrify and by when?
We should electrify everything. Everything in the world should be run on electricity rather than on fossil fuel. And the easiest way to do that, the easiest way to start, is with high-speed rail. And of course, we're building that high-speed rail system in the Central Valley now. We can either build freeways and airports or build high-speed rail. High-speed rail is clean, preserves the environment, gets you there just as fast, and it costs 1/3 as much. We reduce that cost if we create solar panels and windmills near where we're going to be using them. And that's one of the objectives. Solar panels on everything that we build for high-speed rail.
The Adrianne station is expected to see more than 100,000 daily passengers with 7 fixed rail services. Does this give you hope for the future of the region?
Oh yes, and I think it's going to be much more than 100,000 passengers a day. More like 500,000 or 600,000 passengers a day. And it's because you'll have the high-speed rail, you'll have 3 commuter rail lines, you have BART, you have Amtrak, and 7 bus lines, all connecting here. It will be the central interchange point for the valley, and it'll allow this valley to function like a spoke and wheel transportation system like Paris or Toronto or the best systems in the world.
So what changes to the transportation systems do you recommend?
Well, we need to move quickly away from gas-powered cars. And we have to shift as many of those cars, even if they're electric cars, and they will be in the future. We have to shift those cars and those riders into mass transportation. We have to make sure that we don't rely on roadway systems, because we can never handle enough people on roads to make the long-term future of Silicon Valley secure. What we need to do now is just crash ahead, build the electrified transportation systems that the country is going to need, and let California be an example of that.
What do you see the state of transportation looking like in about 100 years?
If we do it right, Silicon Valley will not only be here, but will be thriving. It'll be the heartbeat of the world's high technology. And to make that happen, we've got to allow very high volumes of people to move in and through our valley without using roads. Not unlike London or Paris or New York moves millions of people a day on mass transportation. But you can't do it on roads, any kind of roads. And most importantly, it all needs to be electrically powered. Marty, before we end this interview, I'd like to offer a note of thanks to the Silicon Valley Leadership Group. Back when David Packard founded the organization back in the 1970s, he set up an organization that shepherded this valley into the period of prosperity that we're seeing now. And the leadership group has just been the guide for high quality thought and for planning for the long-term future, including the creation of public funding to build BART and help with the high-speed rail system. And the Valley owes a debt of thanks to the Silicon Valley Leadership Group.
Thank you. It's been great talking to you today.
Thank you.
On deck at SVLG's Building Forward, a panel on the missing middle in developing new housing led by Meta, and a special piece on autonomous freight transport featuring SVLG member Aurora. But first, we thank our community sponsor, Republic Urban Properties, for their support of our forum and our upcoming community event this Friday with Rebuilding Together. Thank you. Next, California Transportation at the post-COVID crossroads with Secretary of the California Transportation Agency, Toks Omishakin. He'll talk with San Jose Mayor Sam Liccardo.
First, Secretary, I wanted to ask a little bit about the Bipartisan Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, which We are thrilled to see it's rapidly investing a lot of funding throughout our country in infrastructure. And really, I think a lot of folks are wondering what we're doing here in the state of California to ensure both that we get our share and that these dollars are invested well to achieve goals like goals of equity here in our local communities.
First of all, a very good morning to everyone listening and a good day to everybody listening. And to you, Mayor Liccardo, thank you as well for your great leadership, not only in the city and the region there in the Bay Area in San Jose, but across the state as well. The support you've provided to the Newsom administration. So thank you very much for your leadership. But to your question about this, what everyone is calling a once in a lifetime infrastructure bill, it's truly remarkable. This is the biggest investment and the most forward-looking investment that we've had in transportation probably since President Eisenhower launched us down the path of building highways in the 1950s. And it's not only remarkable because it's $1.2 trillion for infrastructure and nearly 600 billion for transportation, but the fact that it's taken an aperture that's unique for transportation and saying, let's look at equity-related issues. Let's look at how transportation truly impacts, how it impacts the climate around us, the environment around us, and looks at how transportation, how we need to improve safety in transportation as well, and overall mobility is something truly remarkable. So kudos to President Biden and his team, the Vice President, for sending us in this path. We're projected to get roughly 40 billion over the next 5 years. We're probably stronger than any other state as far as being able to compete for the discretionary components of this money as well. Nearly $100 billion in discretionary money we can potentially get as well, on top of the 40 billion that we're automatically going to get, the formula money. And the reason why is because even before the Biden administration came into office, we as a state, including local governments listening, partners listening, we were already leaders. We were already leading the country on issues around climate, on issues around diversifying mobility, on issues around equity. So we're going to fare well beyond the formula money. We're going to fare very well in getting the discretionary money into the state as well, and continue to be the leaders that we've been.
Well, thanks, Mr. Secretary. You know, we were so fortunate to be able to lure you from Tennessee to California. And I think when you knew coming into this job, you'd have a lot of challenges in a state grappling with issues of traffic. But I suspect one challenge you didn't anticipate is this enormous experiment we're now undergoing on the viability of remote work. And it turns out an awful lot of folks are learning that they don't need to be in the office all the time, all 5 days a week, sometimes none of the 5 days a week. And some amount of remote work is really here to stay. What do you think that really means for the future of public transit? And are we still bullish on public transit in the state of California?
Undoubtedly so. We're definitely still bullish on public transit as a form of improving mobility and providing choices for people to commute in our state. But you know, to your earlier remark, you know, if somebody had said to me in 2019 when I moved to California, look, there's going to be this once in a generation pandemic as well that you've got to deal with and manage the Department of Transportation, you know, I would have been thinking twice or three times about the decision a little bit longer. But it's been a great experience nonetheless. These challenges grow us. If we can make it through it, we get a chance to expand. And we, the folks that are in public service, like you, Mayor, we're going to look back on this time in a decade or more and say, man, I'm glad I had the opportunity to be in service in one of the most challenging periods of an era of a century. You could argue. But to your question about whether or not we stay on track and we're still bullish on transit, yeah, definitely so. It has to be a part of the equation, because as much as we're focused on ZEV investment as a state, and we're leading, not only nationally, but in some cases, I spoke to a group in London virtually this morning. We're leading globally as well when it comes to ZEV. In the best case scenarios that you put together for us being able to tackle the climate change challenge we have, best case scenario, ZEVs will not get us there. ZEVs will not help us get to those ultimate outcomes, those huge reductions that we want to see in GHG. It's going to take a diverse multimodal system. And look, we took a big hit. Everybody knows VTA there in your city, Caltrain, everybody took a big hit as it relates to ridership, despite the fact that we've averaged 1.4 billion riders a year. I mean, those numbers went significantly down into just a few hundreds of millions, but it has to be a part of the equation, not only for those climate challenges, but the equity solutions that we want to have, general mobility solutions. It's going to be there. And so we're going to continue that investment. The governor is proposing in his budget this cycle, again, more investment for transit and more investment for walking and biking opportunities in our state as well.
Well, then we'll keep plowing ahead with those important transit investments. Here in Santa Clara County, we were proud to be the first county in the country to rely on self-help, to tax ourselves, that is, to make important transportation investments. And of course, in the state of California, that requires a support of a supermajority, 2/3 of our residents who are voting. And so we have very important projects like BART to San Jose and Santa Clara, which voters have approved tax increases on 4 separate occasions, Caltrain electrification on 2 separate occasions. And these major projects, and I know it's true in LA and other cities throughout the state, are now encountering pandemic era cost escalations, rapid construction cost escalations. How can the state help? I know you're getting this question from many mayors, including me, and undoubtedly there's always more demand for money than there is money. But is there a role for the state to play here to address these pandemic era construction cost challenges?
That's a good point, Mayor. You know, initially when the pandemic first hit, we actually saw prices going in the opposite direction. We saw prices going down in infrastructure cost. We were seeing bids come in from contractors at a lower level. But with inflation that we're experiencing post the pandemic now, or we can say post the pandemic, those numbers are actually going in the wrong direction, if you will, the opposite direction. Now the prices have spiked, and so we recognize the hit that cities are facing, not only with that inflation, but the reduction in revenue as well from transit agencies. So there's a role for us as a state, but not only through avenues like the governor's budget. Again, he's undoubtedly bullish on transportation and clean transportation, which transit is one of those, clearly one of those. So that's one avenue that we could potentially provide some support to local governments. But again, the federal angle as well, the IDGA bill, trying to see how we can make sure that we leverage some additional federal funds to support those projects that may be facing those cost escalations is something we need to keep in mind. So there's a role for us as a state and potentially a role at the federal government and of course the local level as well.
Mr. Secretary, you can be assured that we are doing all we can to harass the federal government as much as we can. So we will not be only bugging you, but thank you. Appreciate that.
I have heard your name in the halls up there.
Yeah, we'll keep bugging them. Among other major projects, there's one we're particularly proud of here in San Jose, and that's around Diridon Station and of course, our Grand Central Station in the west that we're building here in our downtown. And I know that you're very focused on transportation investments that do more than simply provide transportation to achieve our broader goals around equity, supporting affordable housing, climate sustainability. We have this opportunity, and I'll just give this as an example, of course, here in downtown to be able to provide a convergence for 6 separate transit systems, surrounded by immediate environs, a 7 million square foot campus with Google with 4,000 homes, 1,000 of them are going to be rent restricted and affordable, and a whole lot of other housing as well. As we think about projects like this, how is it that we and you think about aligning state transportation investments to achieve those broader goals?
Yeah, Mayor, the Durdan station is probably one of those sort of unique prototypes that, hopefully can be replicated, especially in urban settings across the state, even more in the coming years. It is probably going to be, it's probably in the future going to be one of the most important transit hubs in the state, for sure, in Northern California. I mean, the confluence of things you just laid out, of all those, from Amtrak to Greyhound to Caltrain, VTA, everybody sort of having this one particular location where they converge is just truly remarkable. But examples like this where it's not only a business center, but potentially a housing center as well, that helps achieve equity goals. From what I understand, one of the things you all are doing is a part of the development, trying to ensure a significant percentage, maybe 25% is what I heard, of the residential development has affordable housing as well. I mean, those are the kinds of things that clearly helps us achieve the GHG reductions we want to see, because that means their transportation means are right there. I mean, it's right there for them. They can get to work and they get to home or places of play within a pretty short distance. So we'll continue to be supportive, very supportive. I know the BART extension is one of the things that you guys are working on. We'll continue to be supportive of transformative projects like this Google campus that's near the Durdan station as well.
Well, thank you, Mr. Secretary. I know that from the time that you were in leadership roles, even in Tennessee, you've always been known as a champion of active transportation. In fact, I think if you go on YouTube, I think there's a pretty funny interview. They've got you behind the wheel, hitching a ride with one advocate of active transportation. I think it's fun to see. In any event, one of the bright spots we're seeing out of this pandemic is, we hope, some of this biking, walking that people are doing is going to continue. And e-bikes are certainly seeing a surge in popularity as well in many cities. And we're planning transit-oriented development with a very specific set of sort of framework about what transit-oriented development is in terms of geographic proximity to whatever the transit is. Do you think that e-bikes and traditional bikes and micromobility and all the scooters are going to help us expand the geography of what transit-oriented really means? Is that going to really help a lot more folks get to transit?
I think so. I definitely think so. Look, we've again gone through a bit of a decline in the usage of micromobility and some means of micromobility during the pandemic, but we saw an uptick actually for people wanting access to walking and biking opportunities, because when transit, we couldn't get into these buses and tubes anymore, people were still looking for options, and they said, look, where's the biking infrastructure? Where's the walking infrastructure? And there are places like where you are in the Bay that were really aggressive about, trying to come up with some pilot efforts to get, more immediate solutions on the ground for walking and biking. But the tie-in to TOD, I think is very important. I think it's very critical. And, when we think about one of the biggest challenges we face as a state as well is clearly residential, the lack of residential units, housing in the state. I think the more that we can come up with affordable TOD solutions, it also helps impact the housing crisis that we have, because it essentially means that we're building near transportation access. I mean, that's what TOD is. You're building more dense development near where transportation access already exists, specifically transit access exists. So the more we can do that, it reduces the dependence on having to pay for transportation, if you will, pay for fuel in the car or have to buy a car. You have that access more immediately by being able to get on transit near where you live. So it's not only a mobility solution that TOD presents. TOD presents a housing and climate solution as well. So and the tie-in to walking and biking facilities is clearly there. And walking and biking will, as we build that infrastructure, will help boost and support TOD development, undoubtedly.
Mr. Secretary, I know that one of the more controversial topics when it comes to transportation policy is around tolling on freeways. And I know I hear it because every time I vote for it, we end up getting a fair amount of pushback from members of the community who are understandably concerned, particularly about equity issues. And in our own Metropolitan Transportation Commission, we're pushing ahead with congestion pricing, charging tolls on freeway lanes as a way to fight congestion and also to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and use some of those resources for infrastructure and transit. And I guess the question is this the direction the state is pushing under your leadership? And given what we know, I mean, there are real concerns about commuters paying those fees and the equity implications of those charges. How do we tackle that challenge, and how do we center equity in the conversation?
Well, Mayor, that's another very important question. I mean, there are states that have been on the East Coast that have been more aggressive about investing in this area, or investing in transportation with this approach by pricing the system, if you will. And local governments have taken a lead more in California. The state has been a little absent in this area, but we recognize the role that we play here, and that it should be stronger. And it has to be a part of the equation. As we think about ZEV and the climate challenges, and we think about multimodal solutions, another very key component of the transportation future for our state has to be congestion pricing and managing the system, congestion management, managing the system in that way. So yeah, it's a part of the solution. When it comes to equity specifically, I think there are a couple of things to keep in mind. Number one, as we move towards pricing the system more, it also means more viable access for transit. So, if we're saying this particular lane is a hot lane, if you will, a high occupancy toll lane, that we're trying to get more people in this one dedicated lane, that also means transit, buses, BRT or whatever it may be, they will be able to use those lanes as well. So, and we know transit often is a more equitable mobility solution. So that provides an uplift from an equity standpoint, because transit will have access there. But also we need to think about subsidizing low income to middle income users of the system as well, to make sure that as we price the system, they can still have access, that we're not boxing out people who don't have the means to be able to have access to opportunity to work. So multiple fronts there. Transit will be a big benefactor as we move towards pricing, but we also need to think about how to make sure we incentivize or subsidize low income riders or transportation users as well to be able to use the system.
Well, Secretary Omishakin, I am so grateful that you've taken your very scarce time to spend with us to talk about these issues, share your insights. We are so fortunate to have you leading the charge here in the state of California, and we look forward to working with you to accomplish so many of these very important goals here in Silicon Valley and throughout the state. Thank you again, and good luck. I know you've got some challenging decisions ahead in the budget process in the next few weeks with the governor, and we wish you all the best.
Thank you, Mayor Liccardo, and thanks to SVLG as well for all the great work they're doing in the region and across the state. Thank you, Mayor.
Coming up in just a bit at SVLG's Building Forward Infrastructure Forum, we dive into the latest in autonomous freight transport and what it means to supply chain issues in the Golden State. Then we go from roads to rails with our high-speed rail panel, headlined by former Transportation Secretary Ray LaHood. But now it's time for Media on the Middle. Stories, strategies, and possible solutions from the front lines and California's missing middle housing. Our panelists today are David Garcia, Policy Director from Berkeley's Turner Center, Louis Hansen, business reporter and editorial from the Mercury News, and Lauren Helper, journalist from the San Francisco Chronicle. Our moderator is Anu Natarajan, housing initiative lead for Meta.
I want to start by thanking SVLG for providing us the opportunity to have this important conversation. So maybe let's start with setting the context before we dive into what middle-income housing is. I'm going to ask each of you to define what the housing crisis means to you. We'll start with Lauren, and then David and Lou.
So much, Anu, and thanks everyone for being here. So the thing that stands out in our reporting at the Chronicle is how intense the pressure on housing is kind of at every edge of the market. So when we're talking about for sale housing, we're hearing about intense competition, record-breaking prices, all the way up to the $2 to $3 million price range, which you'll see is the median home price in some communities like Palo Alto and others. But then also that creates this pressure on the rental market, where you've got families, young families, especially Black and Latino families that are locked into this sort of permanent renting that's permanent for now. The question obviously becomes, do you then look to other parts of California? Do you look to other states, which we can definitely talk about more? And then I think the most dire example of this is the folks who are barely getting by, which manifest for me in interviews with people who live in RVs but are still working a job in construction or at a manufacturing facility in San Jose, where it's just getting really hard to break into rental markets when landlords are asking for, income 3 times the rent. So if you're not making $5,000-$6,000 a month, really we should be talking about homelessness and precarious housing as part of this conversation too.
David?
Yeah, and for me, what is really stark is how the increase in rent and homeownership costs have really exploded, not just for extremely low and low income families, but increasingly into this middle income category, that 80 to 120% of area median income, where previously rent burdens were much lower and access to homeownership was much lower. But today we're seeing just significant increases in cost burdens for those households. So for example, moderate income in Santa Clara County 10 years ago was $123,000 roughly for a household of 4 annually. Today that has ballooned to $181,000. So that's even at that level, you're considered moderate income in Santa Clara County. Similar numbers for San Francisco. And what has also been really alarming was seeing how this has locked people out of home ownership. For example, the share of homes sold that were affordable to middle-income families in Santa Clara County 10 years ago was about 60-70%. Today, it's down to 30%, right? So we have some significant decreases in availability of homes for middle-income families too. So for me, those numbers have been just the most shocking and worrisome.
Lou?
Thanks, Anu, and thanks for having me here today. In my reporting with the Bay Area News Group, we have found pressure all throughout the housing market, from first-time buyers to renters. I think some of the real concerns showed up in a recent poll that we did with the joint venture Silicon Valley that talked that found more people we're looking to move out of the Bay Area in the next few years than ever before. And I think that really shows up in millennials. There's a frustration that the cost of living and housing has just escalated far beyond what's comfortable. And work from home has really also pushed people to realize that there might be some places better outside of the Bay Area. And in interviews with teachers, with people outside the tech industry, there's just incredible frustration. It's months of looking for houses. It's months of trying to find the right rental to move into. So this is a long-term issue. It's been with us for many, many years. And I think the frustration has just grown during COVID.
David, you touched upon this in your response. Moderate income housing, also known as middle income housing or missing middle or workforce housing, various terms to refer to housing for those that don't qualify for subsidized housing, but yet can't afford market rate housing. Do you want to help define what this missing middle looks like?
Yeah, so to your point, it depends on kind of where you stand. For example, in the technical definition has usually been making between 80 and 120% of the area median income. That has traditionally been what we consider moderate. But there's a lot of variation in that bracket, right? 80% is pretty far removed from 120%. So this is can have a lot of variability. But traditionally speaking, these are folks who are, let's say, first responders. They are nurses, they are teachers, they are occupations that make pretty decent incomes, but Anu, to your point, they don't qualify for deed restricted affordable housing, which is for households generally making below 80% of area median income. So they're kind of stuck in this what we call like the donut hole, where they don't qualify for subsidized housing, but they can't really compete for new market rate housing. So they're left to kind of scramble to afford decent, high quality housing. And so that's become a huge challenge there. That's a little bit different than what we usually refer to as missing middle housing, which is more of the housing type itself, right? So things like accessory dwelling units, duplexes, triplexes, small apartment buildings, things that used to be legal prior to the 70s and 80s when cities went through a series of downzonings. A lot of cities are now trying to be proactive about allowing these types of housing developments to come back, both because we need more housing overall, but there is some evidence that by creating just smaller scale housing, that it can be provided at more attainable price points, specifically for moderate income families. So but yeah, there is a lot of overlap between some of these terms, but I think it is important to kind of be very specific about who we're talking about.
Before we get into the gentle density, the duplexes and the fourplexes that David referred to, Lou and Lauren, what are you seeing in your reporting in how the middle class families are responding to the housing crisis? And are you seeing a hollowing out of the middle? Lou?
I think there certainly is that migration away, and that's why you see booming home prices in Boise, in Austin, and in Phoenix. People are moving out. They're realizing that there's the grass is greener. You know, a few years ago, I interviewed a young couple in East San Jose, Brian and Jen Hurst, and they were in their late 20s. They saved, they lived with their parents, they scrimped, they worked multiple jobs, and they came up with $150,000 down payment. They bought a little bungalow in East San Jose. They thought it was going to be their forever home. It lasted about 2 years. And Jen told me, I'm tired of working at 150% to be lower middle class. These were educated. She was a biochemist. He was an instructor at San Jose State. And they finally said, we can't do this forever. They moved up to Spokane, and now they have a 3,200 square foot house, a new baby, and lots of room for their golden retriever to run. That's appealing to a lot of people, and it's not something that everyone in the Bay Area can imagine these days if they're outside of tech and they don't have really high wages. So that's what I see. There's a lot of that effort to make it work here, but if it doesn't, go somewhere else.
Lauren, yes, go ahead.
No, similar to what Lou is saying, I'm also hearing a lot about big yards for Labradors and Golden Retrievers in the suburbs of Dallas or Atlanta or other markets that we hear a lot about. But I think even beyond that, it gets to sort of two main themes that I hear a lot about that speak to this kind of really failure in recent years in the Bay Area to both preserve housing that's affordable for middle-class families and create new opportunities. And we do often talk about it with the general audience as just middle class. You know, people realize that there's been a lot of economic pressure on this group over time, big economic forces. But in the Bay Area, one way that manifests is this intense frustration that Lou's talking about, either trying to get into a home or trying unsuccessfully being able to bear the costs that accumulate over time. So definitely there's this pressure to go out of state, but also hearing a lot right now about folks who moved during the pandemic to outlying areas like parts of Merced County or over the Altamont Pass into the Central Valley, which obviously puts lots of strain on our transportation systems that have been talked about today. But then there's also this issue of holding on to homes, particularly seniors. I hear from a lot about struggling to, pay for an expensive bill to maintain their home, even though they're on a pension from, say, being a postal worker, like a man I recently talked to. And there's just this feeling that, oh man, I'm seeing all of the other houses on my street flip. The realtors are coming. I'm getting all these pamphlets telling me to sell my house. There's a lot of pressure on folks who have managed to get a foothold even. So again, there's this tension between preserving, like trying to keep those folks here long term, and then also finding ways for people who are looking to put down roots here to be able to do that.
So David, you've talked about undersupply of housing being foundational to this housing crisis. Lou and Lauren talked about some of the folks that have been impacted by this crisis. And in what I'm seeing, it also impacts tech workers that have two jobs. Could you address this issue of undersupply and who in your research you're seeing is being impacted?
Yeah, so to be clear, it has been a crisis for lower and extremely low income households for some time, and it continues to be the case, right? So we're talking today about how those cost burdens have climbed the income ladder, and now moderate income families are feeling pressure, but very low and extremely low income households have been bearing the brunt of this for some time, and they continue to bear that. So for example, there's something like 90% of extremely low income households that are rent burdened, right? So that's paying more than 30% of your income towards the rent. It's almost like expected. So first and foremost, I think it's important to acknowledge that these folks are the ones that have been struggling for a long time and continue to struggle at higher rates. I think broadly speaking, this has become a challenge not just of housing, but of also a lot of other things too, like climate change, like mobility, and for economic prosperity, right? So on one hand, Lauren and Lou mentioned a lot of people looking out of state, and it is very likely that the places they are moving to are not as well equipped to handle that kind of extra transportation, right? So higher greenhouse gas emissions from higher vehicle miles traveled from people living in Nevada or Arizona or Texas. So it's almost as if we are, by having a crisis of housing, we are exporting our carbon emissions to other states because it's very likely that they are going to emit more once they're there. But it's also happening in California itself, with a lot of people moving to the Central Valley. The transportation infrastructure there is not the same as it is in the Bay Area. And so it is likely that we are kind of pushing greenhouse gas emissions to these places as well. But it's also become very evident in the business community, right? It's hard to find workers, whether you are a tech company or a healthcare provider, it's hard to keep people here in the Bay Area and in California when they can easily get a job in another state or work remotely and pay just a fraction of the cost for housing. So it has become not just a crisis of, well, can't afford a house. It's become a crisis of, growing California's economy and trying to meet our really ambitious climate change goals.
So Lou, given the option of work from home, especially for tech workers, and being able to work remotely, are you seeing a shift in who's staying, who's moving, and who's buying homes in the Bay Area?
Yeah, the realtors that I talk to, and it really seems like if you're in the market now, particularly in San Francisco, San Mateo, Santa Clara County, you are a tech worker that has some means. And it's very hard to break in when a price in these communities, as Lauren mentioned, is $2 million for a starter home. That means you have to come up with $400,000 to put a 20% down payment. So you're really looking at the people who have substantial incomes. A couple weeks ago, I was at I visited Casa del Maestro in Santa Clara, and that's a teacher apartment complex that Santa Clara Unified School District built 20 years ago. And speaking with teachers there, that was the only way that they could stay. I mean, that was their lifeline to be able to teach in Santa Clara County and stay with their incomes, even though incomes for teachers in Santa Clara County are, over $70,000 to start. Sounds good, but when you put it in the context of what wages are overall in this region, it's not a whole lot, even if a couple is working very hard and doing that. So we're seeing that really difficult time saving up. And even if you're saving up, home prices are leaping past what you can save. So very difficult time to buy a home now if you're outside the tech industry.
Lauren, I'll ask you the question that you posed. Is now the hardest time to buy a home in the Bay Area?
I have to say, I've been getting report after report about record-breaking prices, and then I get one the next month that's record-breaking prices again. This was especially acute sort of last summer when we were first thinking we were starting to emerge into like a next chapter of the pandemic. It's certainly still competitive. I'm hearing in a lot of markets that it's gone from like 20 offers on every house to maybe 5 to 10. And in terms of what that means financially for folks, I'm hearing from brokers that the qualifying income in most of the inner Bay Area competitive markets is around $230,000. And that if it's not an all cash offer, people are putting 20 to 50% down. So to get that kind of cash, you obviously either need to have stock you can cash out, a lot of savings, or a family member who can loan to you to put that money down. And so that means, yes, tech executives for sure, but also all these professional services fields like law, other folks who are in the consulting business, all these sort of professional services fields are who I hear are often in the market right now at those price points. Which is obviously a healthy thing for an economy. You want those folks to put down roots here and contribute to the tax base. But the flip side of that is obviously who's leaving. And from what we're seeing, census data shows that Black Californians are leaving the state at a noticeable rate now, heading to markets like Las Vegas, Phoenix, Atlanta. And then also anecdotally, I talk a lot with young families like Lou mentioned, and also folks who are leaving for ideological reasons. There's now sort of entire online subcultures about people trying to get away from vaccine mandates or from homelessness in California cities. So that is a real phenomenon, I think. So it's varied, it's different from city to city, but the bottom line is that yeah, this is really one of the hardest times there ever has been to buy a house in Silicon Valley.
So David, in your research, what are you seeing in terms of people leaving California? Where are they going? and who's leaving?
Yeah, so we have a lot of data that shows that California net migration has essentially been declining, right? And to the point where you have people making upwards of $120,000, $150,000 per year that continue to leave the state. And what we have seen is that they are generally moving the next state over to Oregon, Nevada, Arizona, but increasingly they're also moving to places like Texas, to places like Washington, other places in the South. What's interesting is that California still continues to have a net positive in-migration of really high income households, right? So households making over $200,000, they are still moving into California more than they are leaving. So for all of the talk of needing to leave California for high taxes, the people who are paying those high taxes still continue to move to California. It's the middle and lower income families that are leaving, and they're leaving for places that again are not going to be as climate conscious as California. So again, running counter to what we want to achieve as a state.
Let's shift to policy work. Legislators in Sacramento have acknowledged that we have a housing crisis since 2016 and before, and there have been a slew of bills trying to address and stem this crisis. So in your opinion, have these bills from the state been impactful in managing or even reducing the housing crisis? Lou?
I think it's taken some time for cities and communities to adopt and understand, and for the market to work for some of these new tools. And David can talk more about ADUs, but there was an initial reluctance to allow them in many cities, and the numbers didn't always work out for a person because it cost a lot to do the construction of a backyard unit. But those costs have come down. A lot of companies have come into the market now to provide pre-made ADUs, which are affordable. Some you can drop right into the backyard with a crane. So that's become a popular option to add housing. I think what I found in my reporting, and I think Lauren may have seen this as well, those are really popular to build a family compound. They're true like in-law units. It's a place for someone to have the grandparents there for the kids and create a nice nest. So that's one way of creating new housing. The SB 9, which allows for lot splitting and building duplexes in large suburban lots, has been fought over in city councils and is still being fought over in cities and counties. That I think is going to take some time to be accepted as well. And I think it's going to take some time for homeowners and developers to understand how they can create new housing by splitting their lot and still, have it financially be feasible. So there's a lot of outrage about that. We saw places like Woodside consider banning SB 9 units because they simply had mountain lions walking through their community. By the way, I'm sure Lauren and I'm sure all of you could probably find some mountain lion in their backyard on some security cam somewhere in the Bay Area. So this is going to be fought over, and the Attorney General has brought in a new enforcement unit to look closely at what cities are doing on these new rules and how they're following state housing law.
The mountain lions are never going to live this down. Lauren, what are you saying?
Yeah, no, Lou's hitting it on the head. So with ADUs, I think that's the most tangible example for a lot of folks of, okay, it seems like something interesting is going on at the state level. Certainly, I think there's starting to be more awareness about SB 9 and sort of the potential for duplexes and fourplexes on properties. Though I will say I'm even down just south of Silicon Valley in Santa Cruz County, and properties that are being marketed here as potential for, oh, split this into a duplex or a fourplex. Like just the land alone is going for $1 million and up. So that really doesn't apply to a lot of the middle income earners we're talking about. Also, the building costs for an ADU, you're going to need some sort of lending line or capital to do that. So that creates a bit of frustration for folks who are like, oh, you know, like years ago, I converted my garage. Maybe I didn't get the permits to do it. So it's really expensive to legalize those units that, again, folks did try to do on a stricter budget. So the general sense that I get from folks is, okay, we understand things are happening at the state level, but it seems to be most applicable to developers and people that have the money to sort of build new structures. The one caveat to that, I would say, is that we've been reporting a lot on rent relief and mortgage relief programs during COVID. I think that was one example of folks getting a honestly not always flattering view of the state trying to figure out how to deal with the housing crisis and make people whole for all this debt that accumulated with people losing jobs. So again, it's playing out on multiple levels for renters and homeowners, but I think it's something where people would like to see more legislation that has a concrete impact on the prices they're paying month to month.
David, you've done a lot of research on this gentle density, adding ADUs, duplexes, and fourplexes. Could you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, so just to touch on the ADU piece, you know, the data we have shows us that, you know, about 50% of ADUs built in California are then rented on the open market. So that's good on one hand, right? You want people to be creating new units. They're oftentimes built in more affluent communities where it's generally harder to get any new homes built. And so from that perspective, that is a positive development. That is a direct result of the legislative changes made starting in 2016. On the other hand, I think it's a little bit tricky to ask homeowners themselves to then become essentially developers to be the solution for alleviating our supply issues, right? So I love to point to ADUs as a success story, but I think a lot of cities, if they could just say, well, look, we're building a lot of ADUs, that's enough. We know that it really will not be enough in the long term. So the idea behind creating more missing middle products, duplexes, triplexes, things like that, is that, you know, we have in most communities 80 to 90% of zoned land reserved for single family homes. And so if we can create just a little bit more housing on a small percentage of those throughout the state, that can be a significant supply of new homes. So I think that's where the real potential is for things like Senate Bill 9. But at the same time, it's going to take a few years for us to really see any results from Senate Bill 9. It took us several years to see results from the ADU legislation in 2016. So I think for, you know, to go back to a previous question, you know, are the policies working? I think on some level they are, but at the same time, you know, trying to do more large scale policies to catalyze more development have been a little bit less successful, right? Thinking about Senate Bill 50, things like that. But the state's requirements that cities now zone for more housing, the housing element or the regional housing needs assessment, I think that does have pretty significant potential, but it is still a little bit early to see whether or not the cities zoning for significant amounts of new housing are actually going to see that new housing get built, because construction costs continue to be really high. There's really a lot left to be seen based on what we're observing today.
So Lou and Lauren, you tell stories about the housing crisis. So what seems to resonate with people in terms of understanding the impact of not having housing and the trade-offs that we need to make in putting in more housing in our neighborhoods? Lauren?
Yeah, I mean, for me, it is those personal stories, and I think, in particular, personal stories where people are doing something creative or trying to like make their way in this crazy market. So we're hearing a lot right now. We're working on a project actually, so no one tell, about sort of this rise of the no strings attached home buying offers. So waiving your loan contingency, waiving your property inspection. And when you really break down for readers, like how much risk people are going through to try to make this work, I think that resonates. Obviously, we've been telling stories for a long time about people who are shut out of the market and moving elsewhere. So now we're drilling deeper into specific groups that impacts, like I mentioned, Black Californians, seniors. And then the other thing is sort of unconventional ownership models like communes, basically. So Lou mentioned like the ADUs for family members. People are buying properties in the desert and going there on the weekends. There's all kinds of ways people are getting around this. And for us, the challenge is capturing the breadth of those stories.
Lou?
It is the amazing creativity that people go through to try to find housing here. And the personal stories, as Lauren said, are very important to having the community understand who is living in these difficult situations. One that strikes me was interviewing a woman who was a clerk in San Mateo and had helped people in the building department get their permits filed. And she had been a good worker there and had been trusted to open the office every morning early because it was so bustling in San Mateo County development. I met her in an RV encampment in East Palo Alto, where she was living in a broken down van with her dogs. Now, she had a job. She had an income. She was doing the things that she was supposed to do. She had a couple bad breaks, some domestic violence that pushed her out of her apartment with her former partner. But it's just that tenuousness. And the people that you see every day, you might not realize in Silicon Valley what they're going home to and what they're experiencing. And I think those are the things that are powerful and need to be shown, hopefully, and the best work that all the journalists covering housing around here do.
Thank you all for taking the time to talk with us today, and thank you for telling these stories. And David, thank you for the much needed research that you do to help tell those stories. And to SVLG, thank you for the opportunity to talk about this work.
Hello, my name is Peter Leroy Munoz, Senior Vice President of Tech and Innovation Policy with the Silicon Valley Leadership Group. Autonomous vehicles are poised to be a critical element of America's innovation economy. They have the potential to increase passenger and pedestrian safety, improve traffic circulation, and most importantly, right now, accelerate the delivery of critical supply chain items. We're here today in Mountain View to meet with Aurora, a cutting-edge company working to make autonomous vehicle trucking a reality.
Aurora is a public company building autonomous vehicle technology based here in California, but with 1,600 plus employees throughout the country. Our goal is simple: make our roads safer and make our economy more efficient. How good of a driver am I on a scale from 1 to 10? If you ask my wife, maybe about an 8. I'm Mufaddal Izzi. I'm Senior Director of State and Local Government Relations and Public Affairs at Aurora. Aurora is founded by early innovators in self-driving tech: Chris Urmson, Sterling Anderson, and Drew Bagnell. Their work at Google, Tesla, and Uber really serves as the foundation of today's self-driving technology industry. Aurora is driving two main areas. One, ride-hailing passenger mobility. There, we're working with Toyota to develop self-driving Siennas for the ride-hailing market. But our other key area, crucial to the market today is in the area of autonomous freight movement. We're working with a network of partners, including PACCAR, the parent company for Peterbilt and Kenworth trucks, Volvo, US Express, FedEx, and Uber Freight. We're working to develop the best ways to integrate autonomous vehicle technology into America's supply chain at scale. But just as we've done through every step of the process, it's about rolling this technology out safely. Aurora is working closely with policymakers to pair safety and innovation for smart, responsible autonomous vehicle development, just as we've done in our pilot programs in Texas, the state with the most miles of public roads in the country.
I've been driving truck for the past 4 decades. Basically, I've driven well over 2 million miles in my lifetime. I'm an autonomous truck operations specialist. I actually go out and test the truck at testing locations, safely pilot it there, and we help advance the software and the hardware on the vehicle. I love working with Aurora. I see this as a trucking evolution, the wave of the future, and I'm proud to be a part of it.
As a driver, I would say I am above average, slightly. My name's Billy Barone. I am a vehicle operations site manager for our Mountain View location out in California. I love what I do because it allows me to connect the people that we have here with the vehicles that we have here, plus the technology. Right now, Aurora vehicles are already on the road. These Aurora-powered autonomous semis, they're currently hauling commercial loads, all in Texas for our freight and logistics partners. Our Aurora self-driving trucks are running day and also night because our rigs don't have the same hours of service limitations as human drivers. Every time one of our Aurora-powered vehicles learns something, like a new capability, they all get smarter. This advances self-driving technology in a way that would be impossible if it was just an on-road fleet.
I work in operations, and how well do I know directions? Ugh. I know landmarks. Hi, I'm Brandis Moore. I'm a senior instructor in the Vehicle Operations Department. What delivers on Aurora's mission of safe autonomous freight, it's our Aurora Driver. It's a combination of advanced sensors, AI software, and data services. It's custom-built, cutting-edge technology that prioritizes safety.
It's what enables Aurora vehicles to safely and efficiently move throughout the world.
Aurora's virtual testing suite allows us to run millions of self-driving simulations every day. It can simulate the equivalent of over 50,000 trucks on the road at once. And they're all accurate to the real world. Let me give you an example of one thing that's a tough maneuver for any trucker, an unprotected left-hand turn.
How many unprotected left turns have I done in a big rig in my career? I've been driving since I was 16 years old. I would have to say thousands.
The Aurora Driver performed over 2 million unprotected left turns in simulation before even attempting one in the real world. When it comes to America's supply chain, there's a numbers problem. Today, in the United States, there's a shortage of 80,000 truck drivers. In the next 6 years, that shortage will likely grow by another 100,000, which means our current supply chain issue could get a lot worse. Our rigs have been maintaining a 100% on-time rating, which goes a long way toward filling gaps in the supply chain.
One of our big goals is to start rolling right here in California. It's our home, but it's also home to some of the biggest crunches in America's supply chain right now. And we know we can make a difference. We're working with lawmakers and regulators to find the best route forward.
In order for California to lead on transportation, we need to get autonomous vehicle trucks on Golden State highways and roads. We need regulators to initiate a rulemaking process for California's autonomous vehicle trucks. This is important not just for infrastructure issues for tomorrow, but to address the critical needs of supply chain here today. Golden State Technology is ready to blaze the next trail. It's time for us to put innovation back in the driver's seat.
Coming up next at SVLG's Building Forward Infrastructure Forum, the All-Star High-Speed Rail Panel, and a closing talk from Governor Gavin Newsom. But first, we thank our social sponsor, HNTB, for their support of our Infrastructure Week Mixer. Thank you. And now, are we there yet? Is a California high-speed rail reality finally in sight? Our panelists? Secretary Ray LaHood, former United States Transportation Secretary; Margaret Sederoth, Director of Planning and Sustainability, California High-Speed Rail; and Russell Jackson, Global Transit Director for AECOM. Our moderator is Silicon Valley Leadership Group CEO, Ahmad Thomas.
Are we there yet? That's our question today about high-speed rail. What a great panel. I hope to have an honest dialogue, a productive dialogue about how this very important project continues to advance. And we'll just jump right in. Meg, first question to you. Where do things stand with high-speed rail? The $4.2 billion that's sitting with the legislature. What is going on there? For our audience, just level set about where we stand.
Great, thank you, Ahmad. Yes, we are there. Today, we have over 119 miles that are in construction. We've secured more than 90% of the parcels necessary for construction. We've completed more than 2/3 of the 93 structures for this construction, and we've created over 7,800 labor jobs. We've begun to take the early steps in design for the entire Merced to Bakersfield line with the release of 2 RFQs, 2 design contracts, that is, and with board approval, hopefully later today, we'll release a station design RFQ for the 4 Central Valley stations for the initial operating segment of high-speed rail. Also pending board approval this month is the completion of the environmental clearance to San Jose. This is really a crucial part of project delivery, and we're very excited to get this first step done in advancing design of the valley-to-valley connection. That $4.2 billion represents the second half of the $9 billion in voter-approved Prop 1A funding. The governor has included those funds in his proposed budget, and the administration is looking to the legislature to appropriate those funds this summer. They will enable us to finish the Merced to Bakersfield work and, crucially, a test track, which is a key part of getting high-speed rail at the 220-mile-an-hour level tested and certified in the United States. And that, of course, it also enables us to continue design work throughout the entire system.
Well, thank you, Meg. That's a very helpful overview, and I think sets the stage about where things stand in Sacramento and in our state. Secretary LaHood, truly honored to have you here as part of our forum and dialogue today. I'd love to ask you the same question about where things stand in Washington and how dollars coming from DC might impact this project. I know for you, you understand the business competitiveness aspects of this project and how important this is to the state. Any thoughts will be much appreciated.
Ahmad, thank you for including me in this very important broadcast program about high-speed rail. We've made significant progress in Washington. I'm honored to serve as one of the 4 co-chairs of the
Well, we may have lost Secretary LaHood there temporarily, which is life sometimes, dealing with a virtual event. So Russell, maybe we'll just turn to you next. We've been talking about a lot of positives. Secretary LaHood, I'm sorry, we lost you there momentarily.
Okay, well, let me just say that we've made a lot of progress. We have a very strong group of people that have been working in Washington, D.C. With the leadership of Congress, including Speaker Pelosi, including Majority Leader Schumer, and including a number of people at the White House in President Biden's administration. The House of Representatives passed, the Senate passed a huge transportation bill, which has an enormous amount of money for rail. Build Back Better passed the House of Representatives that has $10 billion designated for high-speed rail. California would benefit mightily by both of those bills, one that's passed and been signed by the president, one that's pending now in the Senate. And we're waiting now for the Senate. They suspended their debate on Build Back Better due to the fact that they had other pending business like the nomination of a Supreme Court justice, which obviously took precedent over other matters. They will get back to Build Back Better. When they do, we will continue our work to be sure that the $10 billion designated for high-speed rail in America, which California would benefit mightily, will be included in that bill. And we've got great relationships with the leadership at the White House, in the Senate, and we've been in discussions with them. We believe the debate on that bill will be coming forth soon, and we're encouraged by the fact that the House has passed it, and we're encouraged by the fact that we get very strong signals from the White House and the Senate leadership that the $10 billion will be included in that bill.
Well, Secretary LaHood, that's certainly very encouraging, and we are grateful for all of your work. When you look at those dollars and what it might mean for California and Rod Dearden and others, it's very important. That's a positive view and positive feedback from you and from Meg. Maybe Russell, I'll turn to you to not in any way take the conversation in a direction that's not positive, but to be very real. Other parts of the world have seen high-speed rail be financed, be utilized successfully, come online relatively on time and on budget. What can we learn from elsewhere where this has been successful? And maybe why do you think we have faced the difficulties we've faced to date in California with the project?
Thanks so much. I mean, and just to say, it's great to be here with SVLG. I think your question is a really powerful one. If you look at this kind of infrastructure, high-speed rail infrastructure all around the world, it is some of the most complex and the most challenging public sector infrastructure that anyone can build. 400-meter long, quarter of a mile long trains traveling at, as Meg said, in excess of 200 miles an hour. We have to make sure they're very safe. We have to make sure they're very reliable. And they're very long projects. And I think if you look at what's happened all around the world, you know, there are places like Spain and France, China, Japan, and they've been doing this quite a while. And they've been building out the gaps now. They're filling in the gaps of where the bottlenecks are. They're building out their networks. And that's because I think it's been proven to their public, the benefits. But I think there are other countries like the UK, Sweden, Malaysia, and Singapore. I think it's really hard to understand the difference, for people to see the difference in the game-changing nature that high-speed rail brings to a region or to a country. And I think the learning that has come from that with a lot of those countries has certainly been a challenge. If I look at, for example, HS2 in the UK, they have really had similar challenges to where California high-speed rail is at the moment. It's a very, very similar project in terms of the progress made to date and some of the cost challenges. And I think it's really about learning together globally around what needs to be done differently. Different risk profiles, technical improvements, automated design, artificial intelligence. I think bringing all of those things together, those are the kinds of things I already see. If you read the authority's business plan, I'm sure Meg could speak to this. There's definitely a recognition of learning and doing things better and improving continuously. And I think the other thing, just one other point, is really around the public perception. I think it's very much that these programs are about the next generation. And it's hard when there isn't a comparator, there isn't an existing system like this in a country to see what kind of outcomes this kind of program is going to bring. I think that's the benefit that's been seen in some of these countries that have very established networks. And really, they are very much about the next generation. There are short-term impacts and construction activity that it takes a while, but long term, those benefits really come to fruition. Nobody ever builds a high-speed railway and says, gee, that was a terrible idea, we shouldn't do that. What you see is everyone saying, we need to do more of that, we need to build out the network. I think those are the kinds of learning that we need to bring to California for the project, for the program.
Well, what's the realistic path forward? And this is a question to everyone. You know, if you look out over the next 5 years, walk us through the steps to answer the question of the panel. You know, are we there yet? How can we help advance this important project?
Ahmad, if you don't mind, I'd like to begin by indicating again that it's an honor for me to be one of four co-chairs of a coalition that's worked for the last year and a half on persuading Congress to include money. And that's really about the next 5 years. The $1 trillion transportation bill that was passed and signed by President Biden includes an enormous millions of dollars for rail in America. California will benefit by that. But more importantly, the Build Back Better bill that passed the House includes $10 billion, which really takes us out the next 5 years that you've indicated that we should be talking about here, because it will enhance what's gone on in California, where really California is a model for high-speed rail and how to get it done. And with the additional money that the $10 billion will provide, California will have the opportunity and resources to really complete their project over the next several years. And over the next 5 years, that money can be used to help other places, whether it's Nevada, whether it's Texas, whether it's Florida, whether it's Illinois, whether it's the Northeast Corridor. There's lots of places that would like to be in the position California is in, where California has really developed the true high-speed rail, and you're on your way. And this additional money over the next 5 years will help complete the vision that Governor Brown had, that rail enthusiasts have had. And so the next 5 years, in my opinion, if Congress passes Build Back Better with $10 billion, we have the resources to put high-speed rail in America in a way like we've never seen before.
Well, Secretary, I want to double click on that. And we've got about 15 minutes and two subjects that I want to cover, which require much more time. But I want to talk environment and I want to talk finances. And maybe we start, I think, on the environmental piece. We can all agree it's very positive when you look at greenhouse gas reduction and the potential environmental benefits of this project. I want to talk about that. But first, keeping this within a cost envelope has been a challenge. It's a challenge for projects like this. Talk to us about what's different now for the skeptics that are listening in or that are going to see this on social media. You know, address them directly. What is different now about the cost containment models and the ability to get this done and finished in a reasonable time frame and budget?
You want me to start with that?
That's open to anyone, or Meg, maybe if
yeah, Meg, would you mind just touching on that, and then maybe I'll touch on the national part of it, but maybe you can touch on the California aspect, and,
yes,
and maybe Russell could talk a little bit about what's happening in Europe or what happened in Europe.
Right, fantastic, very well organized. So I would say, I think you touched on this earlier, that and Russell spoke to this as well, which is the authority has matured over the past decade and a half. We've gone from a planning organization to a delivery organization. And along that way, with oversight from the board of directors, from the legislature, from our peer review group, we've definitely taken on board all of the lessons from the construction and the delivery to date. And I would say that leadership from the top all the way down has emphasized an enhanced risk mitigation regime, a much more robust approach to anticipating costs, anticipating risks, understanding where contingencies lie. I think all of those lessons taken on board, and a really clear focus on making sure when we move forward with the rest of construction, those lessons are applied So we are looking to securing right-of-way very solidly, making sure our third-party agreements are in hand. I know Secretary LaHood has a wealth of experience understanding that infrastructure projects are complex, and getting them done does require this careful negotiation of many parties and a clear focus on the outcomes. And so all of that speaks to cost control. But I think writ large, having funds in hand and able to move forward construction in a timely manner speaks very clearly to containing costs. The sooner we build this system, the better it is in terms of cost control.
Well, I think, Ahmad, the other thing, what our coalition is really doing now is trying to enhance what you all are doing in California with some of the success we've had in Washington, with the $1 trillion bill, with the $10 billion that's in the House version of the Build Back Better. We know that these kind of resources complement what you all have done in California already. And it sends a message to the legislature. If you approve the $4.2 billion that Governor Newsom wants, it'll be complemented with the work that we're doing in Washington. That's the reason we've taken the coalition's taken such a great deal of interest in California, the $4.2 billion, because each complements one another. The $10 billion in Build Back Better and the $4.2 billion that Governor Newsom has proposed and the legislature will debate. So our coalition is pushing very, very hard, wants to complement all that's been going on, and the good example set by California that you can build high-speed rail in America. It can be done, and you can't be dissuaded by the naysayers.
And Ray, if I can just build on that a little bit, because the fund, first of all, I think, consistent funding for any major infrastructure project, if it isn't consistent, if it's stop-start, that is just so inefficient for everybody involved. So that commitment, I think, is a huge opportunity for the program going forward. But I think the other thing that I'm excited about for California on this program is it is a step change for America. And I think, if I look at railway engineering and railway projects all around the world, there's quite a lot of inefficiency in a lot of them. And I think the opportunity really now is for the authority and for California to take world-class high-speed rail engineering and make it better. And I think there's lots of technologies that America has in other industries where railways lag behind, and to bring those in and really to make things better in that way. So just things like I touched on digital engineering, but also automated construction, factory-based construction, making these kinds of innovations work. I think they'll make the railway quicker. They'll make it quicker to build. They'll make it safer and cheaper to build, and it'll be easier to maintain. And these are all things that I think are potential export opportunities for other parts of the US and around the world. And, just bringing what is great about America to this project and then taking it to another level elsewhere. I think there's just a huge opportunity for where the project is now and the next phase of the project, the stuff that Meg talked about around stations, around the rolling stock, around building out the track and the overhead line that people are going to start seeing more and more of now for the next few years.
Well, let's drill down even closer to home. And I know this question is maybe a bit parochial, but our interests are to make Silicon Valley the most dynamic or continue as the most dynamic economic region in the world. What does this mean for Silicon Valley? We know valley to valley, clearly there's a business competitive component to that to be able to get workers and transport folks from valley to valley, but speak specifically to the benefits we would realize here in Silicon Valley from high-speed rail, please.
Ahmad, let me just say I had an opportunity to listen to part of the last segment where the panelists were talking about the enormity of impact on people's ability to live in California because of housing and so forth. What high-speed rail does, it gets people out of their cars, it gets them away from a gas pump, it cleans the environment. It's totally environmentally a game changer in terms of the environment. Plus, with high gasoline prices, people are not going to be spending the enormity of amount of money that they are, to put gasoline in their automobiles. High-speed rail is the equivalent of cleaning up the air so that people feel like they're living in a clean, green environment. Plus, it's a high-speed rail is affordable. Plus, it gets people out of their automobiles. It's a win-win for the environment and for people's pocketbooks also.
Thank you, Secretary. And Meg, did you want to jump in?
I'm not sure I could possibly add to that. I would appreciate Secretary LaHood to come with me every time I have to talk about the environmental and sustainability benefits of the program, because it really is, as he so eloquently said, a game changer for California. And I know you spoke specifically to the benefits to Silicon Valley, but it's really every valley in the state that's going to benefit. I mean, directly, of course, Silicon Valley has greater access to a range of workers. Their workers will have access to a greater range of places to live. For the Central Valley, it really is transformative. It's an economy that is not as diverse as it could be. It's every time we speak to folks in Fresno and Bakersfield, they are looking to high-speed rail as a project that can help transform their economies to be able to weather the ebb and flow of various economic cycles. And then, as you noted, for Silicon Valley, it means access to new markets. We no longer have to jump in a plane and have back of house in other states. We can keep that closer to home in California and do so without sacrificing environmental quality. And I think further, once we build out the system, you are going to see high-speed rail supplant the air market as well, which is a critical tool in how high-speed rail helps with achieving the state of California's carbon neutrality in the future. And we really are aimed at transforming the California economy to be carbon neutral. And I think high-speed rail is a crucial part of that.
Can I just give a slightly different perspective as well, just in terms of Dearden Station, right? And the example I want to just talk about is in the UK, the biggest station in the UK by passengers is Waterloo Station in London. It's 100 million passengers per year. The second biggest station in the UK, when high-speed rail is finished in the UK, will be Old Oak Common Station. That station doesn't even exist at the moment. It's in an area in the outskirts of London that is completely derelict. It is going to be utterly transformative to have 250,000 people coming to that station every day, once high-speed 2 is built. And I was looking at the plans for Dearden Station, and it is great to see that the authority and their state partners, they really understand that change and they're planning for it. And you cannot underestimate how much of a difference that kind of station is going to be. I think a lot of stations, they're kind of barriers to communities and they're just kind of transient places where people go to move. When you have that scale of people coming in and out of a station, it is totally different for that area. And that's the city and the area around that station is going to be totally different when the high-speed rail comes to Silicon Valley.
Well, Russell, I used to live in London. I knew the tube map like the palm of my hand. And you mentioned that station. I'd never heard of it, but that's helpful to know what's coming. To wrap up here, our last question for all of you, and we'll try and roll a couple components into this. Let's think about the next generation and moving forward and young people. And Secretary, I've seen some of the polling that you all have shared. You had 18 to 39-year-olds with a 65% support of the high-speed rail project. Is it climate that's driving that? Is it a futuristic notion of transportation that's driving that engagement by young people? Would love that perspective. And two, what message do you have for young people who want to see this project happen about how they might be able to engage and add value?
The answer to the second part of your question is support people to the California Assembly and to the Congress that are willing to put the dollars in to make this happen. And the answer to the first part is young people do not want to own an automobile. They want to be able to get on a bus or a train and get where they're going that's affordable, that's clean burning, that's comfortable, and that's what high-speed rail provides. People that move to the Silicon Valley, people that live in California would just soon live without an automobile. High-speed rail will provide that opportunity, and a lot of those are young people. A lot of them are people that want to use their resources for good, clean transportation, i.e. high-speed rail.
Well, Meg, we'll let you have the last word.
Well, I think we love our quality of life in California. We cherish our natural environment. We cherish the open spaces we have. And high-speed rail really it provides that opportunity to maintain mobility, maintain our ease of getting around the state without an automobile. And it really opens up the future to us that is truly sustainable and truly carbon neutral.
Well, Russell, Meg, Secretary LaHood, thank you so much for joining us here today. We could have gone on for another hour here. There's so much to discuss, but hopefully that whets folks' appetite for more. A truly important mega project for the region. We've been proud to be associated with this for many years, encouraged by the positive news that you all have shared with us today. Again, thank you for joining us.
Thank you to all our high-speed rail panelists and SVLG CEO Ahmad Thomas at the Building Forward Forum. And now, with a closing address about infrastructure in the Golden State, California Governor Gavin Newsom.
Hey everybody, Gavin Newsom here. I'm glad to be with you, at least virtually, to thank each and every one of you for your leadership. Thank you for the Silicon Valley Leadership Group's example, your faith and devotion to the issues of housing and transportation that you know better than anyone else are two sides of the same coin. I hope you recognize we're going big on transportation and relief this year. $11 billion just recently proposed in that relief to transit riders and commuters around the state. $9.1 billion proposed in additional forward-looking transportation infrastructure, bike and pedestrian projects, rail investments, and yes, high-speed rail. But we also have to focus as well, not just on the long term, but on the short-term strategies, including shortening commutes and making sure people live and work closer to home. And that's why we're focusing on new strategies around housing, more investment than ever before, $10 billion. Testament to that kind of investment that we advanced last year, another $2 billion in this year's budget to build more housing near downtowns and infill areas, because you recognize, we all recognize, that we can no longer deny that, well, climate is housing. In order to advance our climate goals, we also recognize that we need to, well, cut transportation emissions, but we can't cut our transportation emissions without building millions and millions of new homes for Californians, again, where they live, or rather near where they work. And that's why we're investing in 2.5 million new homes. That's the goal in California over the next 8 years. And of course, the Bay Area is going to be a big part of that. But in order to advance that, we got to hold folks accountable, not just Sacramento. We got to hold local governments accountable like we've never done before. And that's why we created a brand new accountability unit within state government with real consequences for not meeting housing obligations. And we're similarly trying to model strategies on homelessness along those same lines. Accountability at all levels of government. Now, accountability also requires new strategies, new supports, new tools for local government. That's why we've cut red tape. 17, I know this doesn't get a lot of attention, but 17 CEQA reforms just since I've been in office, which is a little over 3 years, have been passed, pushing for new strategies, new investments in modular construction, and providing state land for free for affordable housing. The bottom line is we're leaning in. I know it's not enough on CEQA. I know we have more work to do on new modular construction and prefab, but we're leaning in this direction in ways we haven't in the past. And of course, that's on top of a massive homelessness package. You know, talk about $12 billion, coincidentally, $12 billion also invested in homelessness last year, 55,000 new homes and treatment beds for people coming off the streets in our latest proposal and strategy. Look, I can go on, forgive me for being a little circuitous here today, But I want you to know I appreciate your leadership. I appreciate your example. I appreciate you holding us to a higher level of accountability. And I just want you to know Sacramento's now with intention focusing on these issues like we never have before. When we got here just a few years ago, there was no plan, there was no money, and there really wasn't the political resolve. Now we have plans, we have the resource, and we have political resolve with new accountability, new transparency, and new intentionality. And so I really am confident in the next few years we're going to start making demonstrable progress. But again, we can't do that without you, with your example, with your faith and devotion to the cause of improving the quality of life for millions and millions of people, not just in Silicon Valley, not just in the Bay Area, but all over our state. I look forward to working with each and every one of you. Again, thank you for allowing me the opportunity to share a few words.
And that concludes today's event. Thank you to all our federal, state, and local guests who came to today's forum, Building Forward from SVLG. And that includes you, the audience. Thank you for coming.